Hello, my crafty friends. It's Stacy of Stacy Creates Stuff, and today I am bringing you a knitting tutorial where we are going to create a quilted look with a knitting stitch. The good news for this particular stitch is that you only need to know how to knit and to purl. Yep, we are going to make this very cool textured look with just knits and purls. And at the end of the video, I'm going to show you what this can look like in a variety of yarns so that you can see how you can utilize this stitch. Let's get started. Let's first take a look at the completed swatch done in cream so that you can see what the pattern is going to do. So it has this quilted look, these threads of yarn that just appear to be woven through the otherwise stockinette background. And this is achieved quite simply with slip stitches. So I'm going to show you how easy it is. Now this entire pattern has 8 rows that are repeated. And before you panic or think, oh, that's a lot of rows, a lot to kind of try to keep organized, it's not. It's not that bad at all. All of the wrong side rows are purl. So immediately half of the 8 are purl rows. So now we're just down to 4 rows that are different. And if you look at the pattern, you have a set of lines that go like this, and then you have a set, so here's the bottom of this little line here, and then the next line up, it has shifted over like half of a width of the line. So 2 rows are going to be creating this line, and the other 2 rows are going to be very similar, just shifted over. So you'll have a little different beginning, a little different ending, but otherwise the middle part of the rows are exactly the same. I think you'll see what I mean as we get going. I have cast on my 23 stitches, 6 times 3. I'm going to have 3 repeats. That's 18 plus 3 is 21. And then I have added a stitch at the beginning and the end. That makes 23. So I'm always going to knit the first one and slip the last one. I cast those on. I did the first row, which was purl across. I knit the first one. I purled all the way to the last stitch, which I slipped. So I'm ready to now to start row 2. I've knit that first one. I'm going to knit 2, bring my yarn to the front, and then slip 5 stitches. And I'm slipping those purlwise. And then I want to make sure I don't bunch them up on the needle. I want to keep them nice and spread apart there. Bring my yarn to the back. I'm not pulling it very tight. I'm just holding it in place so there is some play in that yarn going across the front there. I'm going to knit 1, bring my yarn to the front, slip 5 stitches again, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bring my yarn to the back, knit 1, bring my yarn to the front, slip 5 more. Again, making sure that those are spread out. Bring my yarn to the back again, knit 2. And then I have my edge stitch, which I'm just going to slip. Now we're on a wrong side row, and so this is just purling across. I am knitting my first stitch because I do that as an edge stitch. Then I will purl all the way until the last stitch, which I will slip. All right. Now as we turn this around, we can see these bits of yarn coming across. So I like to think of that first right side row as the setup. So we've set up the yarn coming across all those slipped stitches. And now we're going to sort of anchor those pieces. So again, I'm just going to knit the first stitch because that's my edge stitch. And then I'm going to knit 4 stitches. And when I get to the 5th stitch, which is the middle of those 5, so these 3 plus the 2 that I've already knit over here, those were the ones that had been slipped. Before I knit this next stitch, I want to come underneath that slipped piece of yarn. Then I can go in, knit that stitch, and then bring my needle back out. And that, well, you'll see a little bit better in a moment, but that anchors that piece of yarn that went across those slip stitches. So now I am going to knit 5. 1, 2, and that 3rd stitch should be the stitch that's between where I slipped stitches before. 3, 4, 5. All right, we're ready to knit the next one. And again, I'm going to come underneath the thread that came in front, knit the stitch, and then bring my needle back from underneath of it. Knit 5. Bring my needle underneath the yarn that was in front, knit the stitch, bring my yarn back from underneath, and knit 4. That'll be the end. We get to the end of our row, and then my last stitch, I slip. So it's a little hard to see at this moment, so let me go ahead and do that wrong side row, which is just purling back, and then I think you'll be able to see better how that thread that carried in front of the stitches now gets anchored down. So we're already a little more than halfway there, having completed that wrong side row. We've done 5 rows so far. That went pretty quickly, wouldn't you say? So now I think you can see how that stitch where we went under, picking up that thread that went in front, knit the stitch, and then brought our needle back out, it places that carried yarn behind that stitch. And of course it did that all the way across. So that is the first part of, it's hard to see down here, so we'll look at this section here. We've done the first part. Now we need to offset that so that we end up with this quilted diamond. If we were to repeat those same 4 rows, we would just get like a chevron. Could be interesting. Might be something we explore at a different time. But for now, we're going to continue as the pattern is written. So I'm going to start off with knitting 1. That's my edge stitch. Then I'm going to knit 1, bring my yarn to the front and slip 3. Bring my yarn to the back. And my next stitch, which is just a knit 1, should be right above where I had picked up that yarn before. So knit 1, bring the yarn to the front. Now we're slipping 5. And again, I'm not pulling tightly. I'm keeping it nice and loose there in the front. Knit 1. That was good. It lined up where it needs to line up. Bring my yarn to the front, knit 5, or slip 5. Bring my yarn to the back, knit 1, bring my yarn to the front, slip 3, because I'm now at the end there, bring my yarn to the back, and knit 1. And then I'll slip the last one. So this, the center section is the same. It's that bring the yarn to the front, slip 5, knit 1, bring the yarn to the front, slip 5, knit 1. But on the edges, we need to do essentially half of a spot there at the beginning of the end, and you'll see how that works in just a moment. Let me go ahead and do row 7 here, which is wrong side. I'm going to purl. All right, we're back on the front side. Untwist that. It is a very curly piece here. So that was a setup row for this second half of the quilted stitch. This is row 8. So we're going to knit that first one. That's my edge stitch. I'm then going to knit 1, and then I'm going to come under and knit 1, bring that up. Then I will knit 5. 1, 2. That third one aligns with that column of stitches. That was 3, 4, 5. I'm now in the center of where that yarn had come before, going under the yarn, knitting that stitch, coming back from under the yarn, knitting 5, going under the yarn, knit the stitch, come back from under the yarn, knit 5, and now I just need to go under that shorter piece of yarn, knit 1, come back from underneath of it, knit 1, and then slip that last stitch. And I think you can see a little bit there of how it is making what looks like an X if you look at that part of it, but it looks like a little diamond shape there. So you have half a diamond, full diamond, full diamond, half a diamond, and now we're going to repeat those rows. So just to reiterate, I've just finished row 1 of the repeat, which was the wrong side row. We have a setup row, wrong side row, a kind of fix the yarn in place row, wrong side row, and then we're going to shift over, setup row, wrong side row, set the yarn in place, wrong side row. It's really not that bad. All right, so we're back to the beginning. I knit 2 stitches of the repeat, bring my yarn to the front, slip the 5 stitches. And I know I'm on track because as I bring my yarn to the back again to knit the stitch, I am knitting in that column where there's no thread coming across. And again, I'm always making sure that I have a nice loose tension across that thread that is carried over. Now we are ready to set these carried threads in place. And I know I'm on the correct stitch. Whoops, not yet. There we go. When I have that same column that's coming up. So I'm going under, knitting the stitch, and coming back. And there you can see that that continues that column of stitches where the yarn is behind. So let's keep going and I'll show you the result. So I've done a few more rows and I want to talk about how you're going to end this swatch or your project or whatnot. Because of course, if you do a setup row, you really can't end there and bind off on the next row. You really have to finish securing those bits of yarn that get carried across the front. So I am ready to start a new row. Now we've done 2 complete repeats. So we have an X here, we have an X here, but you don't have to end having done all 8 rows. You can end after 4. So let me show you. We're going to start with our edge stitch and we're going to knit our 2, and then we start with our bringing the yarn forward and slipping 5. Again, making sure that that's nice and loose. Knit 1, bring it forward, slip 5, Take it to the back, knit 1. Nothing new here at this point. And now, of course, I'm going to go ahead and do the purl side row. And now we are ready for the row that secures these strands. So you have to make sure that you do that row, because otherwise you're left with these weird little strands, like becoming big toe catchers. Could you bind off on this row and secure them? I suppose you could. But I would myself find that a little bit awkward to do. Certainly you could do it, but hopefully for whatever project you're on, doing one more row wouldn't be detrimental to the project. So we're going to go ahead and secure. I wanted to show you too my technique. Once you really get going, I like to kind of come in from here, grab that stitch, knit it, and then just slip right out. You'll figure out your own technique, might be slightly different than mine. Whatever is most comfortable for you, that's what you want to do. So now all those strands are secured behind those stitches. So you could go ahead and bind off on the wrong side row, either by binding off in purl, binding off in knit is fine. I'm going to go ahead and purl this row and then bind off on the next row. If only I could purl that fast in real life. All right, so this next row, if I were continuing this swatch, would be a setup row for stranding the yarn across. But because I'm ready to bind off my swatch, I can go ahead and bind off on this row. I could just knit this row all the way across and bind off on the next row. That would work as well. The point is that you don't want to leave those long strands without them being secured. Now I'm binding off. When I get down to the last 2 stitches, I tend to work them together, and that helps prevent that weird little bit that sometimes is hanging off. All right, and there we have our swatch. Now, I purposely chose a semi-solid yarn. I believe this is Happiness by Collage Yarns. I'm not sure that they make that anymore, but it is a beautiful tonal hand-dyed yarn, and I just wanted to show you what this particular stitch would look like on something like that. So of course we can see on a solid, there's no variation in color. It is what it is. Still a beautiful texture. But then when you do the semi-solid, you kind of get this light or darker strand, depending on what color it is, pulled across a slight variation. Shall we take a look at a more variegated yarn and see what this stitch would look like? I worked up not 1, but 2 different samples with some variegated yarn. So this top one here is a wool blend, and it has short repeats of color. And so you can see that there's like little splotches of color, even in a very small swatch. These would be spread out even more across a larger swatch. And you can see that the strands that get carried through kind of break up that a little bit. Then I used a non-wool yarn. I believe this one is probably cotton and viscose. And this has longer strands of color before it changes. And so you get more, if you just look at the background part, more striping going across rather than the blotches of color. And here on this particular small swatch, it just happens to work out that like the strands are all purple or teal or blue or pink. Now, certainly if this swatch were much longer, then this strand would eventually change to a different color as it goes across. But I do like how it kind of breaks up the stripe a little bit and gives it a little bit more depth. I'm not as crazy about this one, and it may just be the colors. These really aren't my favorite colors to start with. So it really just depends on the look that you're trying to achieve. And it is worth it doing a swatch. Now, if I were, for instance, making a sweater and needed to cast on quite a larger number of stitches, then I may want to go ahead and knit a few rows to see how it's coming through. But the swatch does give me a little hint about what it could be. So, because this, while it looks like it's relatively striped in this particular size, again, if I made it much larger, these stripes would be shifting colors as they went across. And who knows, they may even end up getting some pooling of color here and there. It just depends. But I just thought it would be kind of fun to take a look at what different yarns would work up to. Another note on this one, because it's not the wool, so the strands aren't as springy, and here, these first ones, not so bad now that I've kind of really stretched it out, but I kept them too loose carrying them across. I found that these were better to be a little bit tighter than I did with the wool. The wool has some spring to it. This does not have any spring. So if they're too loose, then they're kind of droopy and you don't get those nice sharp points. So I was a little bit better here on these last two rows to keep them just a little bit, not tight, but not be stretching so far across. I hope you enjoyed learning how to do the quilted stitch, and I hope you will give it a try. I do want to caution, though, that if you are planning to use this stitch, I would not use it for items for small children, infants, because that's just asking for trouble for their little fingers to get in there and really pull on those stranded pieces. But I think a hat for an adult, a blanket, a sweater, even if it's not the entire sweater, but just part of it, would be smashing. So I'd love to know how you would use this stitch. And until next time, why not check out this?